Hi, I'm Patrick Giguère with Cosmic Alchemist Astrology, and thank you very much for tuning in today. So I've got a beast of a video for you today. This has taken some time to put together, and it's going to take me a minute or two to spit this out. So this is probably going to run an hour, maybe a little more. So I'd recommend use the toilet, get a drink, get a snack. You're going to want to kind of hunker down for this one. Quick thank you. Thank you to everybody who watches this channel, who subscribes, watches the videos, comments, likes, and shares. It's very helpful. It's very encouraging. I appreciate you very much. If you're not yet a subscriber, I ask you to continue doing so. You'll get an alert every time I upload a new video. And I've been going at a pretty decent clip these days, so got a lot of stuff coming out. So let's get into this topic. I don't want to ramble too much. I want to be as concise as possible, but there's a lot to talk about. So I'm not a 10, 15 minute reality TV guy. Sometimes this stuff takes some time. So what's today's topic? Today's topic, I'm making this video on July the 31st, 2022. It's a very special day. This is the day of the Uranus, Mars, and Rahu, aka Dragon's Head, aka North Node of the Moon conjunction. So the conjunction in Aries, 24 degrees between, again, Uranus, Mars, and Rahu, the North Node of the Moon. I like to call it the Dragon's Head. And a quick, by the way, I'm using primarily Vedic sidereal astrology. So if the placement of planets within signs and degrees sound wrong, it's by design. But I take Western astrology into account because it's a good system, but I find the sidereal a little more specific. So let's get into this topic. Enough disclaimers and rambling. I'm already starting. So this is a big conjunction. So 24 degrees of Aries, Uranus, Mars, and Rahu, the North Node of the Moon. This conjunction between these three planets, even though Rahu is a shadow planet, between these three planets has not happened in Aries in 2,300 years. So 2,300 years. It's been a very long time. It was actually the dawn of the Age of Pisces that we just completed. I think we completed Pisces in 2012 and moved on to the Age of Aquarius. I think that is why the Mayan or Toltec calendar from Central America, I think that's why it ran out and restarted in 2012. It was the end of the age and the beginning of the new one. They had very advanced astrology and they understood the precession of the equinoxes. So it was the beginning of a new age. And interestingly, I guess my first tangent on the video, it was Pope Gregory, I want to say the 16th perhaps. He was a pope during the 1500s. And one of the little missions that the Vatican sent out the imperial powers of Europe on was to raid archaeological goodies, get a hold of tablets, books, any kinds of artifacts that conveyed esoteric, occult just means hidden, esoteric, occult, and sort of spiritual knowledge. And starting, even before then, I'd say around the year 300, the Vatican was already stuffing the Vatican vaults full of this stuff. It's like when they had the mob burn the Library of Alexandria. They burned a lot of stuff, but then they stole a lot of stuff because they wanted to monopolize esoteric and occult knowledge. So the Vatican was already collecting this stuff. So in the 1500s, the Spanish were raiding the Aztec in the Incan, archives and temples and sending a lot of this stuff back to Rome. So getting back to Pope Gregory, when they got a hold of that Aztec calendar, which I guess originated with the Mayans and maybe a civilization even older than them, the Toltecs. So Pope Gregory had the scholars and scribes take this Aztec Toltec calendar that ran out, well, going to run out in 2012. They took that calendar, they got the best mathematicians in Germany to come to the Vatican in Rome, and they created the Gregorian calendar. So up until Pope Gregory in the 1500s, we had a Julian calendar. It's an older calendar. I'm pretty sure the Russian-speaking world still uses it. They're still on the Julian calendar because they split. The Orthodox Church split from the Vatican in the 11th century. It was around like 1054 or something like that. So they still use that older calendar. So Pope Gregory had the Julian calendar altered, and they called it the Gregorian calendar. And that is what the Western world is using as a calendar. So that's why I said it's today, July 31st, 2022. Calendar was revamped. And time is a really weird thing. When you're trying to go into the past and assign a date to something, it's actually really murky about what the year really was. And it's kind of murky about what the year really is right now. So the Pope, the cardinals, and these scholars in the Vatican understood how precise that this Aztec Toltec calendar was. This aka Mayan calendar. It's known as the Mayan calendar primarily. That was the big, we didn't know what the fuck was going to happen in 2012. It said the world was ending. Really, the Age of Pisces was ending. So the Age of Pisces is all about getting the shaft, and it's all about worshiping hierarchies, whether we worship psychopaths in power or we kiss the feet of gurus who can kind of also be psychopaths too. Basically, in the Age of Pisces, it's the pyramid, and a few people at the top boss everyone else around. And so your choices are either to be a rebel, which doesn't get met very well. They react badly to that. Or you can just be beaten down and go with the flow. Or to rise in the world, you can kiss ass. You can get in the good books of people higher on the pyramid with you. So those are basically the lifestyle options in Pisces. It sucks. In short, it sucks. So that was running out. Once the powers in the Vatican, the principals, the top figures in the Vatican got a hold of that calendar, they're like, okay, this thing's running out. Why don't we sync up our calendar with it? Because it's more precise than anything we have. Because the Catholic Church had caused a dark age after the fall of the Roman Empire. They wanted everybody illiterate and ignorant. So a lot of astrological know-how and skill and knowledge and insight was lost. Because the Catholic Church was in its prime when everybody was ignorant, superstitious, and illiterate. And we're still dealing with some of that today. I always say the Protestant churches are more committed to Catholic values these days. More to thinking like the Bible's is completely, the words are falling out of my head. Thinking the Bible is, taking it literally. Thinking it is completely true down to the letter. Things like that, even like the old Catholic sexual repression. There's a lot of things that the Protestants are really running with that the Catholic Church kind of abandoned. So we're still dealing with this shit. So anyway, yeah, the age of Pisces was a real beast. So getting back to the point, this conjunction, Rahu-Uranus-Mars, happened in Aries. Last time it happened, right before the dawn of the age of Pisces. So now we're in the early stages of Aquarius. And this conjunction is happening again. This is a conjunction, and I'll sum this up kind of now, and then we'll go deeper into it. What this conjunction is all about, it's about basically earth-shattering change and innovation that is thorough, and I would say very aggressive, very sudden, very unexpected, that really just challenges everybody's assumptions. And so the last time this happened in 300 BC, there are a lot of different things going on. So for one, Alexander the Great, he was an egomaniac, he was delusional. He thought he was going to conquer the whole world or as much as possible and unite it. And he thought he was going to live forever, too. He thought he was going to find the secrets of immortality, which immortality is not exactly what people think it is. It's not about having a 25-year-old body forever. It's actually getting out of the cycle of reincarnation and moving on to become an immortal, a spiritual immortal, or an elf. Those terms are where the whole concept of guardian angels came from. It's like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda and Anakin in the Star Wars movies. They became Force ghosts. That's what being an immortal really is. So somebody like Alexander, a warmonger and an empire builder, would never grasp that. And he died in his 30s from basically exhausting himself. So he thought he was going to conquer the world and bring about this new way of life and this new empire. And he did that in large part. And, one thing he was trying to do was he was just like a modern politician. He was being egged on and encouraged and basically getting fluffed by his corporate sponsors. So they were telling him how great he was and how he could create this empire and be remembered forever. Alexander was, he had corporate sponsors and then he had religious sponsors. So there was basically a mystery school. It's hard to find images of this, but there are statues. Actually, a friend sent me a photo of one that was passing through, I think, a gallery in Georgetown within the last few years, Georgetown, Washington, D.C. And there was a statue of a Macedonian soldier, and on his forehead, he had the all-seeing eye. Now, people think the all-seeing eye is evil. We have an all-seeing eye in the midbrain. It's about this high. It's about in the midbrain. Another term for it is the optic thalamus, or the pineal gland. We all have an all-seeing eye, but that symbol of that all-seeing eye in the pyramid that's what that's referring to. So a lot of those Macedonian soldiers had that on their helmets. And so Alexander was backed by this mystery school, kind of a hidden religion that was only open to, the elites of society or the people they wanted to bring in that were, from not so elite backgrounds. So Alexander thought he was going to revolutionize the world, change the world. One thing he did was he linked Europe back up with the Silk Road. So yeah, I think in very ancient times, Europe was linked to the Silk Road, and especially when the Scythians were really, in their heyday. But there were cataclysms along the way and collapses, and things kind of fell apart. So there were people in Europe who knew, in Greece, places like that, who knew they could make a lot of money by importing goods from Asia. So there were a lot of people behind Alexander, and they were pumping his ego up. So he thought he was going to do that. He thought he was going to rule the world and live forever. Well, he didn't. We have people like that right now. We have these wackos, what's like Eric Schmidt, who was the Google CEO, and Bill Gates, and whoever the fuck in Silicon Valley, doing all these crazy fucking designer drugs, and they think they're going to upload their consciousness into a server and live in a virtual reality. And there's a company that wants to deliver basically artificial bodies by 2045 that look real, feel real. So they think they can actually upload their consciousness into a fucking robot so they can live forever. But that's a bunch of bullshit. You can't be yourself without your body. Your body has a lot to do with your personality and the state of your organs and your tissues. But they're going to try. So we're still dealing with these assholes. Another thing that was happening around what we call 300 BC, 300 BCE, the Chinese Empire created paper money. So they started printing basically banknotes on, I think it was goat skin and deer skin. So it was this idea to one, make money more portable. But also what you can do is you can basically print more money than you have backing for. And, they understood this. So the interesting thing is that 300 BC, the precession of the equinox. So precession of the equinox is all about what constellation the sun is rising in on the spring equinox on that day. So 300 BC was the end of the age of Aries. And then the sun went on to Pisces. So Aries it's where the sun, in Western astrology, the sun rises on the spring equinox on first degree of Aries. It's the start of the Aries season. So Aries is where the sun is exalted, because in the northern hemisphere it's coming back over the equator and spring's returning. So gold is the metal of the sun. So gold was a big thing in the age of Aries. The age of Aries was roughly 4,000 years to 2,000 years ago, roughly. So gold is the metal of the sun. So gold is a pain in the ass. People recognize its intrinsic value, but it's heavy. So that's why they created paper money. So when we were going into the age of Pisces, a water sign, it's interesting. The financial powers in the Chinese Empire were like, let's make money portable. So money kind of went from solid to liquid. And so now that we're going into the age of Aquarius, which is a water sign, money's going to vaporize. And we're already seeing this with cryptocurrency. I'm not having such a revolutionary thought here. I think it's going to inevitably go that way. But it's a matter of what is the world going to look like? How does the system get implemented? How does it get enforced? And what does the day-to-day life of regular people look like? And there's different ways this can go. So, one way this can go, we can have an open and a free world, and everybody has financial freedom, financial privacy, and perhaps corporations can start paying their fair share of taxes. As the American Constitution says, the American Constitution says nothing about taxing individual income. It's unconstitutional. So we could go that way, and I think many of us will go that way because, again, 2024, July 16th, it's the second American Independence Day, the second American Revolution. Many people will choose to go this way. And there's even an underdog deep state faction that is backing this and promoting this. The other way the world can go is cryptocurrency can just turn into Fed coin and, European Central Bank coin and Bank of England coin. And we can live in the same financial tyranny we live in now under these banking cartels that try to make it look like they're arms of the government. They call the Federal Reserve Bank. They use the word federal so people think it's part of the government, but it's really no more federal than Federal Express. It's a private banking cartel that kind of poses as an arm of government. It's a big financial tyranny. They're the ones who brought about federal income tax, because instead of the government creating its own money, the Federal Reserve creates the money, lends it to the government, and the government's got to pay it back. So the money has to get inflated every year. More money has to get created every year so that the interest can get paid back. So basically it was like 1913, a crooked president and crooked members of Congress signed the Federal Reserve Act. So they delegated the money creating power of Congress to a cartel of private banks. So that's a way this could all go. A lot of people are afraid of this right now. It looks like there's going to be this elite controlled cryptocurrency that people can get locked out of if they don't get their experimental shots in the shoulder from the drug companies who basically own the government and the politicians, and who pony up 60% of all media sponsorship. So it looks like it's going to go that way, kind of, like a mark of the beast kind of thing, and everybody's going to be slaves, and if you don't comply, they shut off your ability to buy food and go to work. Some people will run with that, but this is not what's coming for the whole world. And I'm always telling people, this is not what's coming to the whole world. I think the world's going to diverge. So one sort of stream of people are going to go with freedom and human dignity. They're going to renew the American Revolution. The other stream of thought and stream of people are going to double down on tyranny and oppression and slavery because they think it's cuddly and compassionate and progressive. So countries are going to break up this decade. It doesn't seem like it. It seems like mom and dad's world is going to go on forever, but I think about 2026, that's going to be the verge of it. April 2026. Excuse me. Yeah, April. It's when Neptune gets to the same degree it was at in 1861 in April, when the American Civil War started. I don't think this is going to be a bloodbath civil war. It's going to be more of a legal and kind of a corporate thing, but I think the blue states, the democratic states in the U.S., are going to be the rebels, and they're going to want to pull away from the federal government. I think the Republicans will gain control of the federal government. So we're talking the northern states in America and the West Coast. I think they're going to split off and pull away. It's going to be some kind of autonomy deal. It's still going to be one country, but it's going to kind of be two countries because those states are going to want to wear their masks for the rest of their lives and get every new shot that the drug dealers create and, get governments to mandate and to push and encourage people to get. And then the states that stay with, Washington, D.C., so I'm talking like the heartland and the southern states, that's going to be more like United States of America proper. So that's going to be interesting. So, yeah. So the point to all this is we're on the verge of big innovations that are inevitable. They can't be avoided. They can't be stopped. Just like 2,300 years ago, just like 300 BC. And there are people who are trying to conquer the world right now who want to be immortals, because they're delusional. They're going to fail. It's going to be like in the Lord of the Rings novel where Saruman, the wizard, the white wizard who becomes corrupt, he gets kicked out of Isengard, and then he basically goes and licks his wounds and lords over the Shire until the hobbits get back and kick his ass out of there. So I think these people are just going to hunker down in California and New York and Washington, D.C. and Chicago and kind of lick their wounds and just revel in the worship of their followers in those big northern and western cities. So, yeah, they're going to have limited success. They're not going to be ultimately successful, but it looks like it. They're great at scaring the shit out of people. They control most of the media, but, just hang in on this one here. So let's talk about these planets involved, right? So again, Uranus, Rahu, and Mars. In the constellation of Aries, it'll actually be in the sign of Taurus. So what happens is, I consider the constellations and the signs to be two different things. So the way, and I think there is something to Western astrology. Western astrology creates some permanence because it is synced up with the seasons. So the 12 constellations, Aries through Pisces in the sky, they actually shift over the sky over time. So the equinoxes, over millennia, the equinoxes and the solstices happen in different constellations. So It was about 2,300 years ago, actually, when Western astrology as we know it was created. So what they did was they just permanently set 1 degree of Aries to the day of the spring equinox, when the sun passes over the equator back into the northern hemisphere, from our point of view in the northern hemisphere. So they set 1 degree of Aries to that day. So Aries is, in that system, Aries is always the first day of spring, the first degree of Aries. And then, let me see, what is it? First day of summer, 1 degree of Cancer, June 21st. And then first day of fall, 1 degree of Libra, the fall equinox. And then winter solstice, yeah. It's like 1 degree of Capricorn in December 21st. So Western astrology is tied to the seasons. And it was set like that about 2,300 years ago, oddly enough, in ancient Greece. But the actual constellations that the signs of the zodiac are named after have drifted out. So according to the constellations, we have the spring equinox in Pisces, summer solstice in what? Gemini, fall equinox, autumn equinox in Virgo, and then the winter solstice in Sagittarius. So you kind of have to take both into account here. So the conjunction Uranus, Mars, Rahu. Constellation of Aries, but it's actually the sign of Taurus. I like to look primarily at the actual constellation that it's taking place in. That's the idea of sidereal astrology. But then I also look at the tropical. I also look at the Western, because you got to look at the energy of the season. So it's a little convoluted, but bear with me. So, constellation of Aries. Aries is the head. Aries is leadership. Aries is initiative. Aries is action. Aries is the home sign of Mars. Mars is warrior energy, athlete energy, engineers, builders, surgeons. It's all about doing things, getting things done, getting up, get it done, build it, make it happen. That's Aries. So Aries deals with leadership. It deals with the head. Anatomically, it deals with the head. It's how people think. It's what goes on inside people's heads. But this energy, this Martian, this Mars energy of action, kind of the essence of Aries, the yang sign of Mars. It's all about going out in the world and doing things. Whereas Scorpio is the yin sign of Mars. It's about going inside yourself, finding your power within yourself. So Aries is all about going out in the world and establishing your power in the exterior world. Leadership is a big part of that. It's about leading other people. So then it happens, though, because the conjunction takes place at 24 Aries, sidereally in the constellation. So with the sign, you add about 24 degrees to that. You're at around like 18 Taurus. So Aries is a cardinal sign. It's a Kickstarter. Taurus it's earth, and it's fixed. It's all about holding on to things. It's all about materiality. So having this conjunction take place in Aries, it's about massive innovation in leadership, massive innovation in how we think, massive innovation in how we act in the world and how things get done. But then when you look at it from Western astrology with Taurus, it's about massive changes in wealth and in the material world. So that's pretty interesting. So Mars I've talked about. It's energy, it's vitality, it's violence, aggression, warriors, sports, leaders, initiative, building, engineering, it's all that stuff. Rahu, aka the dragon's head, aka the north node of the moon, that's a karmic point. So in this placement of Rahu is a thing I get into in readings because it tells you in your birth chart what you were born into this incarnation to do and to accomplish and to explore and to try to master. Wherever it is in your chart, it's where you are most obsessive. It's about what you wanted to just be great at in life. That's a big part of a reading that I get into. So Rahu changes constellations, changes signs every year and a half. So it's like the world's karma for that year and a half time period. So sidereally, Rahu, again, it's in Aries. So dealing with leadership, dealing with action and initiative and thinking. Aries is also identity. Big part of Aries is identity because, your head, what you think, your face, big parts of your identity. And then again, it's in Taurus from a Western perspective, which is money. And it's all about holding on to material things. So, and Rahu is its obsessiveness. It expands whatever planets it comes into contact with. Because Rahu takes things in, whereas Ketu, the south node, lets things go. Rahu is also the trickster. So the tricksters are catalysts for evolution. Basically, when things get stale and stagnant and they just get, the world gets stuck and people are just doing the same old thing, but it's not working anymore, tricksters come in and they break the rules and they make big changes. They make big changes very quickly. So other names of Rahu are Loki and Lucifer. Prometheus is also a trickster. So the name Loki and Lucifer, they come from this Indo-European, aka Aryan word, which was Luka. It's something like L-U-K-K-E. Luka stands for a flash of lightning. It's basically, it's like when lightning starts a fire. So this Rahu energy, this trickster energy, this Loki, Lucifer, it burns out the dead wood in a forest. And forest fires are actually an essential part of keeping forests healthy because it burns underbrush so that the big trees can get stronger. So these tricksters, Rahu, Loki, Lucifer, Prometheus, they burn the dead wood so that evolution can continue. So this word Luka, or Loki, Lucifer, it's all about a flash of intellectual brilliance or spiritual brilliance. So intellectual and spiritual insights and epiphanies and revelations. And this is the whole myth of Prometheus stealing the fire from the gods so that man could use it, so humanity could use it. All about this. So the reason, but when you say the word Lucifer, a lot, religious people, they start clutching their pearls and they're like, oh, Lucifer's the devil and Satan and the prince of evil. No, it isn't. That's church propaganda because religions are businesses. And the religions of the Age of Pisces, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism, they thrive on ignorance and illiteracy. So the last thing any of these religions or churches want you to do is to have a flash of spiritual and intellectual insight and brilliance. Because if you do that, you're not going to get bossed around by a bunch of old men who want to tell you what to do for a living because they don't want to do road work or some kind of manual labor that breaks their bodies. They'd rather boss people around. So yeah, Lucifer is not what your church tells you it is. It's about a flash of intellectual and spiritual insight and brilliance. So yeah, so Rahu, this trickster, Lucifer, Loki, Prometheus, brings about like ahas and epiphanies. Now these can be false. If we're delusional, we can have false epiphanies and be like, I follow the science. I'm going to get an experimental injection. Or these false epiphanies can be equally juvenile on the other end, and they can be like, well, Jesus isn't going to save you because you don't follow the rules. You know, there's also that energy on the other end of the spectrum. Religion's a toxic thing, as we've known it in the Age of Pisces. And science has become a religion, you know, just like churchianity. And Islam and Judaism and Buddhism. So yeah, so that is Rahu. And then Uranus is an interesting planet. So Uranus has this 84-year orbit. I almost see Uranus as like a higher order, a higher octave of Rahu, or the North Node. So Rahu, the North Node, takes 42 years to mature. All of the planets in our charts have a certain period of maturation. It takes them a certain number of years to mature. Before they're mature, they're not quite online. And they can kind of, when they're not online, they can kind of be gaps in our sort of perception. So it's like Mercury, for example, it matures at 28. So before you're 28, your intellect is not quite online. You don't quite think clearly. And this has been scientifically proven that it takes 28, 29 years for the frontal lobe of the brain, the executive function, to fully come online. So Rahu takes 42 years. So we go down a lot of blind alleys until we're about 42. Most of us do. So, and this is because Rahu is just like that energy of like, I want to try this, I want to try this, because it's the karma, the desire that caused us to be born into our current incarnation. So it wants to explore and try things, and it's just like, it's like this devourer. It consumes information and experiences, and it's a bottomless pit, because the symbol for it is a decapitated head. So whatever it eats just falls out the bottom and it can't get satisfied. But it has a lot to do with just being your real self and expressing yourself. So that takes 42 years to come online, to mature. After 42, it's like we're very realistic about who we are, about what we want from life, about what's going to work for us and what won't. Now Uranus, its orbit is double the maturity period for Rahu. So an orbit of Uranus is 84 years. So that's why we're reliving a lot of things. We've been reliving themes from the 1930s and the buildup of World War II. So based on the positioning of Uranus, we're in about 1938, 1937, 38. Yeah, probably like, yeah. Let me see. Yeah, 20. Yeah, we're in about the fall of 1937. And was it May 2024 is going to be like September 1939 when World War II started. So yeah, we're in like the fall of 1937 right now. So Uranus has an 84-year orbit. So Uranus, the orbit is double the maturity period of Rahu. Uranus is all about self-expression. Uranus is all about change. So like some examples of this, it's like when, you know, somebody is like, a lot of time in their 40s, it's like somebody who's like had a family suddenly comes out of the closet, and they might have like 2, 3, 4, or however many children, and they're married, but they go to their spouse and they go to their family, and they're like, you know what? They're like, I'm actually gay and I've been living a lie. After 42, that's a big time. Like I've known people, they get to like 44, 45, and they just can't live the lie anymore. So, you know, in that 42 years, at halfway to 84, that's like the period of the midlife crisis. It's like the check-in period. It's like, have you been living as yourself, or have you been living as your mommy and daddy and your brothers and sisters and your friends and your college friends and your coworkers? Are you living the way you think they want you to live. That's what the midlife crisis is all about. So the midlife crisis is like halfway to that 84-year Uranus return. And once people get to that 84, man, they know how to let shit slide. They know what's worth freaking out about and what isn't. So that's like the magic of reaching that age. It's like if you can get that far, you know what matters and you know what's total bullshit and you know how to let it slide. So, yeah. So Uranus inevitably means change because it's all about getting real and it's about expressing yourself and whatever that is. It's about being as freaky as you have to be in order to be your real self and to get the pressure of other people off you. You know, it's like to get the pressure of, I don't know, your mother or your father off you. Being like, well, you were always so smart in school and you were so successful in your job and I never thought you would do blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, tough shit. That's who I am. It's all about not giving a shit. Uranus is all about not giving, and Rahu, they're about not giving a shit about the goddamn pearl clutchers who want to feel better about themselves by living vicariously through you and getting you to live their dreams that they never got to have. That's really what this planet's about. Because Uranus shakes the heavens and the earth. It's a significator of earthquakes. And it shakes the minds of humanity, the minds of men. It turns old, stagnant, stale assumptions and status quos upside down. And Uranus brings in a lot of innovation. So, you know, and this is a thing we're here in the world to do. We're here to be ourselves and to not just be mommy and daddy's little monsters. So to stop being a product of our families. We can still honor our families and be our real selves. So it's all about dumping the guilt about being what other people think we should be. So that's something Uranus deals with. Uranus also deals with electricity, deals with lightning, deals with the nervous system, just like Mercury does, on a higher order. And Uranus also deals with electronics and computer technology. So, and Rahu also deals with computers. So there's a big thing here with this conjunction with, and Mars can also weirdly deal with computers a lot because it's got this whole engineering and building aspect to it. So there's definitely something electronic, something in the realm of computers that people want to build at this time. You know, 2,300 years ago, closest thing you had to a computer was an abacus. Well, you know what? They had like Antikythera mechanisms too. They had cog computers that were based on gears. At least in Europe they did. And they would compute things using like gear technology. But now we've had this whole nanotech revolution. And we're on the verge of another nanotech revolution. And like I said earlier, it's about which way that's going to go. So let me get back to my notes here. So yeah, we're inevitably on the verge of some electronic computer technology revolution. It's going to get even crazier. And I think with the experimental shots from the drug pushers, they're trying to create smart humans. A lot of people think this is bullshit. I think there's something to it. People I've known in the military-industrial complex, people I knew in the military, it's like I've seen, heard, and learned some crazy shit about technology available. I think there is something to this idea about, in these experimental medicines, about putting certain metals into the human body that react to Wi-Fi signals and like 5G signals. I think that's what like a nanobot really is. People, they talk about like miniature robots building each other. Yeah, I think that's possible, but I think it's unreliable. I think what a nanobot really is it's metal particulate that you could put into someone's body that will react to signals and rearrange itself and behave in certain ways according to signals. So some people want to build this empire, this global empire, one government, one language, one culture, one currency. What else am I forgetting? One religion, which is turning out to be university science. The dawn of the smart human hinges upon, the building of this empire hinges upon humanity willingly becoming smart humans. Well, not completely willingly, but they have to roll their sleeve up. They're not going to build this empire. It's going to be just like Alexander the Great, 2,300 years ago, the last time this Rahu Mars-Uranus conjunction happened. But they'll have limited success, and then that empire will fall. I think, what was it? Right after Alexander died, his empire was split into three. So it was, Ptolemy is the one that I know of the most. He ruled Egypt and, Palestine, kind of the southern end of the Eastern Mediterranean. There was a guy who took over the territories in Europe, like Greece and Macedonia. And then there was another guy who took over basically like Iran, Iraq, Babylon, and then even Bactria, kind of modern day Pakistan. I can't remember the names of the other two. So right after Alexander died, his empire was split into three pieces. So it didn't even last a generation. So all the Bill Gateses, Eric Schmidts, Klaus Schwabs, all these creepy fuckers who want to have their consciousness loaded into robot bodies so they can live forever, their empire is not going to last long. It's actually like the Fifth Reich. I think the United States, after World War II, was the Fourth Reich. So I think they're going to have the Fifth Reich. It's not going to last long. And it's going to be, the West Coast of the United States, the northern states. And so I think countries all over the place are going to split up about this shit. So, and like I said, the American Revolution is going to reignite for the second time in 2024. So, and humanity is going to start parting ways. So it looks scary, but not as scary as it looks. The other thing I wanted to say too about Uranus, I almost forgot this. Uranus, it's an interesting planet. So it's the eccentric planet. So every planet in the solar system, its axis is 90 degrees to the ecliptic, the path that the sun travels from our perspective on Earth. So, but Uranus has its axis parallel to that ecliptic. So Uranus is like on its side compared to all the other planets. So it's the eccentric planet. It's the weird planet. Uranus is actually the sky, the heavens personified. And Uranus is also the gatekeeper into paradise. So this whole idea of this unseen God of the heavens that allows you into paradise, that's Uranus. That's an old idea. That's not a Judeo-Christian concept. That's thousands and thousands of years old. It's like if you go back to the Renaissance and to medieval times and you look at the spheres of the planets, basically the planets ruled these concentric spheres that had Earth at the center. So the whole thing about Earth being the center of the solar system or the universe, that is a metaphysical concept that has some truth to it. So the idea was incarnating souls had to start out at the sphere of Saturn. Saturn is the most distant visible planet. They had to work their way in, so Saturn to Jupiter, to Mars, and so on and so forth, till they got to the Earth. And then after physical death, the spirits would have to work their way back out of these spheres and back past the ring of Saturn, the sphere of Saturn. But what's often not talked about is that Uranus is the one beyond Saturn. So Uranus, the heavens, the god of the heavens, rules the gate to paradise. So this whole thing, like, you know, when you go into Sunday school and you're a kid and they're like, well, when you die, if you're a good little rule follower, God will let you through the pearly gates of heaven. That's Uranus. And Uranus was one of these, you know, ancient of days. You know, Saturn's the real ancient of days, but Uranus was a Titan too. Uranus was the father of Saturn. So yeah, so this god in the heavens that allows you into paradise is really Uranus. So Uranus was the son of Gaia, so Gaia, the earth goddess. Some myths say that she self-conceived and then had him, and then he was her like spouse and consort. Other myths say that his father was the ether. So the ether is the immortal air. You know, it's the air that the immortals breathe. You know, the celestial gods and the humans who become immortals, who become elves. So yeah, Uranus is a really interesting planet. So, and you know, back to what I was saying about Uranus and Rahu, both dealing with computer technology, and just technology in general. So we see this in cycles. So every 16 years, because again, Rahu and Ketu, the nodes of the moon, who are always in opposite signs, take 16 years to go around the zodiac. I mean, take 18 and a half years. Every 16 years thereabouts, they meet up with Uranus. Rahu, meets up with Uranus every 16 years. So when we go back in time, we see these jumps. We see these leaps in technology. Almost kind of like a stair-step kind of a thing. You know, we see these great innovations every time Uranus and Rahu meet up. So when you go back to the last time Uranus and Rahu were together, puts you in 2007. So this was, they had touchscreen technology for many years, and I even know people who, you know, in special operations back 30 years ago, and they had tablets and, you know, sort of smartphone kind of devices. But smartphones were rolled out to the public in 2007. So that was the first time we got to buy and use those. 2007 was also kind of the, you know, the official dawn of social media. CIA already had a Facebook. The Facebook is, people who are CIA employees have to fill out a Facebook. So what you have to do is, if you work for them, you have to tell them who your family members and friends and acquaintances and everybody you have contact with is, so that they can know who to monitor to make sure you're not, you know, embezzling money or, you know, spying, selling their secrets to somebody else. They don't only watch your finances, but they watch, if you're an employee or you're somehow working with them, they watch the finances of your families and friends too, to make sure you're not funneling money. So yeah, the Facebook was rolled out to us in 2007. Twitter also came into being. 1991, big year. Gulf War I, Desert Storm, fall of the Soviet Union. A lot of revolts and protests in Eastern Europe. So you had, what was it, like the Velvet Revolution in the Czech Republic. All those former Eastern Bloc communist Soviet states, a lot of them had protests and revolts and, you know, wanted, you know, representative government, aka democracy, or, you know, republics. Also that year, launch of the World Wide Web. The internet existed for the benefit of the military for many years before that. But in 91, we could get access to it. Like the national labs, people who worked for them, had the internet, but it became a consumer product in 1991. The cell phone network also became a consumer product in 1991. So that really laid the foundations to change some things technologically. 1776, the space shuttle was rolled out. Just the year before that, 1975, that was the last Apollo mission. What was that? Apollo 17 or 15 or 17? I think Apollo 18, 1975. That was the one where the Apollo capsule docked with the Soyuz capsule, which was the craft that the Soviet Union was using for their space program. That was like kind of the equivalent to the Apollo. I think actually Alan Shepard was the mission commander. He was a Navy pilot who was officially the first American in space as part of the Mercury program, which President Eisenhower started or President Eisenhower signed off on in 1958-59. So yeah, 75 you had that last Apollo mission, and then 76 it was, the space shuttle was like unveiled. Also 1976, Apple Computer opened its doors. So they're still with us. They're still a big company. They're still kind of like building stuff at the state of the art. So then 1961, big year too. That was the Mercury program was in full swing. That was the program that put the first Americans in space in the early 60s. So that was like Alan Shepard, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Gordon Cooper. I think those are the 4 Americans that went into space with the Mercury program. And then, JFK by that point had kicked off the space race. JFK had said, we're going to go to the moon by 1970. And he was pushing a lot of that stuff. JFK even kind of revolutionized the U.S. Armed Forces. So the Army had special forces since what? About the early 1950s, around Korean wartime, and maybe the late 1940s. And they wore their kind of signature green beret, which they're known for today. But it was kind of like unofficial. It wasn't like an official part of the uniform. JFK made the Army Special Forces like a permanent institution. And they were basically created as teachers. So what they would do, they would go to kind of allied countries, mostly in the developing world during the Cold War. And they would teach people how to shoot, how to be a professional military, but then they would also teach them about like how to dig wells, how to have water sanitation, how to do medical care. So yeah, they were teachers. They taught a lot of useful skills too, not just like military stuff. So JFK made them an official organization, gave them that mission. JFK also, there was also an internal function that he gave to the Army Special Forces, the Green Berets. He built kind of a fail-safe into them in case the government ever went rogue. He basically, if there was like a standing order that the top sergeant in every, was it 16-man A-team had to have a plan of what to do if the government went rogue. It was a rogue government that shot Kennedy, a secret deep state government. But basically, the special forces, Kennedy intended that if the government went rogue, the special forces would train American civilians to resist a runaway government. So, and that's pretty interesting. JFK also started the Navy SEALs as kind of a force that could react very rapidly to situations around the world. He recognized what was going on. So the deep state in America, they knew that Europe was too devastated by World War II to have another war, actually by both world wars to have another one. And wars are basically economic bubbles that keep the governments afloat, keep the currencies afloat. You know, everybody's retirement account pays out because we're having constant warfare. And the big corporations that puppeteer the government and the military, and that the CIA works for, they benefit from wars because they can go overseas and basically steal shit and basically loot countries. So, yeah, all of our investment accounts are dependent on constant warfare. So all the Nazis that were brought in after World War II to the United States and given war crimes immunity, and they built the medical system and the highway system and the airlines and NASA, CIA, NSA. They helped create this approach to pumping up the economy. So the strategy was constant warfare in the third world because Europe couldn't sustain another war. So, yeah, for the last 75 years, I call 1945 to 2020 the World War II party. It was the World War II after party. You know, and the children and grandchildren of the World War II generation, their great claim to fame is that mommy and daddy or grandma and grandpa won World War II. So we've been like spoiled brats who inherited a company from the grandparents or parents who founded it. And we've been pissing it away for 75 years because we've been entitled, narcissistic, self-righteous, spoiled brats. So JFK saw this going on. He knew that deep state needed to have constant warfare in order to keep the economy afloat in the way they wanted to conduct it. So what he wanted to do was basically spare most of the military and the population from it. So he's like, well, if we can just fight low-intensity wars instead of these giant hot wars, then, you know, we can have a lesser of two evils. So, yeah, he and his team definitely were looking into the future. And then the last one, if you go back, it's about 1946. That was when the credit card was rolled out, 1946. Seems like a lot newer than that, but that's been around a while. Because debt was a big part of the World War II party from 1945 to 2020. You know, during the Cold War, lending companies and banks, they basically, through the help of the media, they brainwashed Americans into thinking that we can defeat the Soviets if you take out a loan, if you max out your credit cards. It was a scam to make them rich, but they engaged people's naive sense of patriotism in it. So yeah, 1946, advent of the credit card, debt became popular. And the banks, big individuals who have a lot of stock in banks, like David Rockefeller, he would donate $1 billion to Harvard every so often. And big banks, giant corporations, they're constantly donating to private universities, you know, like the Ivy Leagues and others. They build buildings for them. They build libraries, labs, academic buildings. But these donations come at a price. So really the university system is just a training program so you can go work for the Fortune 500. It's not about education and truth and intellectual prowess. It's about getting trained as a worker for the Fortune 500. So, yeah. So, yeah, basically the point with that is that even in business schools, you know, 1946 and onward, they started teaching people getting MBAs that you're fucking smart to be in debt all the time. Well, you can write off your interest, and and it's like, or you can write off, there's this whole thing about how debt will offset your tax liability. So it's like a lot of people who live large lifestyles and have multiple houses, everything's fucking mortgaged to the hilt because they're like, well, I pay less taxes because everything's financed. And it's like, yeah, you're fucking poor. It's like the, in the ranching community, they say, all hat and no cattle. It's like, well, you look rich, but you're not. You don't own anything. You're financing everything. So, yeah, 1946, advent of the credit card. 1946 was also the advent of Project Paperclip. That was a program that brought thousands of Nazis, many of them war criminals, into America to, again, build NSA, CIA, the medical system, the airlines, the interstate highway system, NASA. They built our whole country. So we're living in the Fourth Reich. And even the social welfare system especially that Canada, Australia, Western Europe does, that was all pioneered by the Nazis. That stuff's not evil, but no one knows where it comes from. The Nazis also pioneered Environmental Protection Agency, animal rights. Yeah. It's like everything that is, the democratic socialists consider to be hallmarks of a good society, that was all pioneered by the Third Reich. The shit's not evil, but they just don't know where it comes from. And they love to make fun of other people and call them Nazis. And it's like, well, we've all been Nazis for the last 75 years. It's like, we just have to admit that. One of Nazi Germany's plans, too, if they had won World War II, was to dismantle all the factories in Germany and Austria and actually send them to the Third World. So send them to like the Middle East, places like that. So it's just like we've done in America and in Western Europe and Australia. We just sent all of our pollution to brown people in the Third World. We didn't eliminate it. We just exported it. So, yeah. So, and a lot of innovation has been hampered for a long time. It's like we could have our modern standard of living and all of our comforts. We could do it cleanly, but there are so many businesses that don't want to spend the money to change and do it cleanly. They want to keep doing it dirty. So, yeah. Okay, let's get back on track here. Yeah. So we've come back around here. So Rahu, Uranus, and Mars in Aries. So again, Aries, leadership, initiative, going out in the world and doing things, finding your power in the external world. So the interesting thing is that Uranus, since Uranus is involved, the thing Uranus will always do, it'll always destabilize the opposite or the opposing side, because that's just what it does. And every planet casts an aspect to the opposing sign. So the opposite sign here is Libra. So Libra is balance. Symbol is the scales. So the scales are wobbling. Uranus is causing these scales to wobble. Feels like the world is very out of balance. And, I think we're going to feel this for years, but especially until October, till we get this solar eclipse in Libra, where K2 is. It's going to be 6 months of real kind of real like wobbly and really unbalanced. We're not really going to understand why it's, most of the world is not going to understand, and not that I understand it to the nth degree either, but most of the world is not going to understand it for like the first 6 months, and then what is that? excuse me, not 6 months. What is it, August? Yeah, close to 3 months. The eclipses are 6 months apart, but the Aries one was back in April. Yeah, so the next like 2.5, 3 months, we're not going to understand why things feel so weird. We've been in a big buildup for a long time. To me, this feels like a calm before the storm. This is like before something really crazy happens, before shit hits the fan. I've been in different shit hits the fan situations, and it feels like the buildup to that. It's a hell of a limbo, and it sucks waiting. So, yeah, these next few months are gonna be kind of like weird and chaotic, and it's like, what the hell's going on? Then we're gonna start to see, okay, this is what we've been building up to. So yeah, Uranus is disrupting the balance of Libra. Libra also deals with all of our partnerships, all of our relationships, romantic, business, social, otherwise. So Rahu was also in Aries, and Ketu was also in Libra back in the 1960s when like the civil rights movement was going on, all those protests and rioting, during Vietnam. So we're kind of back to that in a way based on the position of the nodes. So when thinking gets innovated and revolutionized and turns on its head, and people start trying to become their real selves, just like, there was a big counterculture in the 1960s, and people were like, we're sick, young people, and even some older people, like we're sick of being, pearl clutching rule followers who just do everything the government and church and our teachers and our parents tell us to do. We want to be our real selves. We want to find out who we really are. This caused a lot of blowback, and really conservative-minded people got really angry, and it split up friendships and families. And we've seen this with the whole thing with the experimental shots from the drug pushers. People have lost friendships because either they got pushed out because they didn't want the injection, or they pushed people out of their lives who did get them. This is like the Garden of Eden story. God in Genesis is mostly like a complete narcissist. And in that story, Adam and Eve, the whole thing about the tree of good and evil, and they ate of the fruit of it, they wanted to find out who they were, and they were being kept ignorant by Jehovah and his fellow gods, these Elohim. And when they wanted to learn more about themselves, basically, when Adam and Eve wanted to learn more about themselves, which he did not want them to do, he just went full narcissist, and he was like, I hate you, get out of my life, and I hate your children, and you're all assholes, and get out of my sight. It's like, when you don't bow down to narcissists and do what they want you to do, they flip out on you. So, church, state, education, government have all been run by narcissists for thousands of years. So the point is, there are a lot of social falling outs, just like there were in the 1960s, when people wanted to be real, and they wanted to learn about themselves. They wanted to learn about sexuality. They didn't want to be terrified of sex anymore. They wanted to see what mind-altering substances were like. They were like, should we be fighting this war in Vietnam just to get a pat on the back and told we're good patriots and Americans? People started asking questions, and the powers that be didn't like it. And so right now, the powers that be don't like it that people are asking questions. They're like, well, is this new experimental injectable medicine really safe? You came up with it in a year. You didn't do proper trials. Stuff like that. It was emergency use. Like, I don't know if that's a good idea. There's a lot of blowback. People are losing jobs, losing relationships, family members. So, we're back to it. Now, man, I'm talking a while. So we're getting down to it. There's a whole government part I want to go into about this. So one of the most famous Rahu-Uranus conjunctions in Aries, but Mars was not part of it, was in 1855. It was in March 1855. So, and by the way, constellation of Aries for United States of America is the fifth house. So the fifth house, it's our intelligence, it's our creativity. It also deals with just like enjoyment, entertainment, fun. Intelligence and creativity are big parts of that. So that's what Aries is. Aries is that fifth house, creativity and intelligence for America. Now, it also deals with art. It deals with performance art. Politics is pure performance art. It's a giant reality TV show. It has been so since the Kennedy administration. Kennedy was the first president whose like whole presidency was televised. So, yeah, fifth house is the performance art. So politics, the performance art of politics, you know, the Hollywood movie magic of it, also falls into the fifth house. So that Rahu-Uranus conjunction in Aries in 1859, that set the stage for the first American Civil War, which happened in April 1861, so 6 years later, when Neptune was at, I think, 8 degrees of Pisces from the sidereal reckoning. It would have been what? It was in Aries by the reckoning of Western astrology. So it actually came to the same sign. Well, so actually Western astrology, 1855, Rahu and Uranus met in Taurus. So yeah. In either case, Neptune would reach a degree in the previous sign. So anyway, this Rahu-Uranus conjunction in Aries in 1855 changed American politics radically. Now, what happened in 1855, that was the start of of Bleeding Kansas. So Bleeding Kansas was basically a border war that went on quite some time. Started in 1855, even went through the Civil War. So it was like a 10-year kind of a thing, this border war between Missouri and Kansas. So how'd the border war happen? So and in the 1840s, the U.S. Congress reached an agreement called the Missouri Compromise. So at that point, you had slave states and free states. And neither the slave states nor the free states wanted to be dominated in the U.S. Congress. So they said that every time a new state, basically states had to come into the Union in pairs. So back in the 1800s, you had states, you had U.S. territories within the continental United States. So a territory, so let's say like a free state like Kansas planned to come into the Union as a free state. It couldn't come in until another slave state was ready to come in with it. So it kept the numbers of members of Congress balanced. So there would be equal reps and senators from the free states and the slave states. So when Missouri came into the Union in the 1840s, this agreement was reached. So Kansas was slated to come in as a free state. But there were vested interests, commercial interests in Missouri that wanted Kansas to be a slave state. So what started happening, the border ruffians started crossing the border from Missouri into Kansas. And they would beat people up, kill people, burn towns, burn houses. They create all kinds of chaos. And then in the election of March 1855, people from Missouri were coming into Kansas and pretending to be citizens and residents of Kansas, and they were voting in the Kansas elections for pro-slavery candidates. So basically the Kansas elections were being undermined. It was massive election fraud back then in 1855. So at this point, I have to be very careful what I say. The way YouTube works these days is if you make any reference to the 2020 executive contest, presidential contest, if you make any reference to the final result possibly being different than what was said, you can get your channel shut down. So I have to be careful here now. So having Rahu and Uranus back in Aries like it was in 1855, but then having Mars there, this could be even more explosive than it was in 1855. So this border war that started between Kansas and Missouri in 1855 at this Rahu-Uranus conjunction in Aries, it created this north-south slave state versus free state tension. And it eventually culminated in Charleston, South Carolina. I think it was April 12th, 1861. That's when the militia of South Carolina actually bombarded a U.S. Army-controlled fort in the harbor in Charleston, South Carolina. And that's when South Carolina seceded from the Union, and then the other southern states, the slave states, ruled by the Democratic Party, pulled out of the Union. So I think in like 2026, the Democratic Party will try to pull away again. But now the geography is opposite. So now in the 2020s, Democratic Party dominates the West Coast and the northern states. So the geography just flipped. But I think fundamentally they're still the slave party because they get a lot of contributions from companies like Apple who use slave labor in Asia. The other thing with the Democratic Party too is they preach racial equality, but if, especially if the African American community and other so-called minority communities were not disadvantaged, the Democratic Party would have nothing to do. They thrive on misery. They thrive on inner city misery, and they thrive on rural poverty too. So even, Caucasian rural poverty, they thrive on that. They dominate West Virginia, and it's like there's like a lot of meth and a lot of rural poverty and backwardness. So they absolutely thrive on people's misery. So I still think they're the slave party. Republicans are a bunch of chumps too, but they don't act nice. The Democratic Party acts nice and cuddly, and they fool people. So yeah, we're going to build up to another split, but I don't see the bloodbath like the first Civil War, but I do see some legal corporate division within the United States. An interesting thing in 1855, Pluto was in Aries with Rahu and Uranus. So Pluto really just drags things out from under the rug, things we don't want to deal with. So it was like this festering wound, which was this division in the United States that had to be resolved. So now with Mars, with Rahu and Uranus, I think it's going to be more aggressive, more sudden, more explosive. So we'll see what happens. Now, last thing I want to talk about, and this will probably be a separate video pretty soon, is our so-called leaders here in America. I think this, let me get my notes here, I think this conjunction of Uranus, Rahu, and Mars and Aries can have a pretty potent effect on Mr. Joe Biden and Ms. Kamala Harris. I think they're kind of up shit's creek from here on out. We might even see some leadership changes here in America. Who knows? Figure something out real quick. Yeah. Actually, we can even bring Nancy Pelosi into this too. So, hang on, I gotta adjust my cushion here. All right. So, let's look at Joe Biden. So, Joe Biden definitely, the guy's not in good health. I don't give a shit about politicians either way, so I look at him and I'm like, man, this guy's in rough shape. Since the 80s, he's had 2 brain aneurysms. He's had surgeries for both. I'm sure the cocaine didn't help back in the day. But, I mean, the cognitive decline is just, it's very apparent. There are stories about how for most of the day he's like sitting in a chair and he's unresponsive. And then he gets injections all through the day, and then it takes a little while and his meds kick in and he can make speeches and run around. He's probably even more medicated than JFK. JFK was on a massive amount of drugs. JFK was on painkillers, amphetamines, and then he was on sleeping medications. He had Addison's disease, which is when the body doesn't make adrenaline, and he suffered back injuries during World War II. So he had massive back pain and endocrine dysfunction. So at the touchiest parts of the Cold War, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, he was fucking flying on painkillers and amphetamines. So he was getting injections all day long. He got one to go to sleep. So I think Biden is just as medicated, if not more, because he's got that doctor that follows him around with that little medical bag. I think he's often, especially with these summits, like these G8, G7, G20 summits, I think he's often late and he keeps people waiting because they have to wait for his medication to kick in. You know, and even Dr. Jill comes around, you know, his wife, and I think she sticks him with something too. So he's in rough shape. He's had so much shit happen, like within the past 6 months. He has had, my God, when K2 in Rahu always moving retrograde. K2 is in Libra now. When it was in Scorpio, 2021 and early this year, it passed over his ascendant, his Venus, and his sun. K2 over your sun when you're at that age and that state of health, no bueno, not very good. He also had a lunar eclipse. What was it? The day after his birthday. So there was a lunar eclipse. Scorpio, I think it was November 20th, 2021. His birthday was the 19th, or it might be flipped, but within a day. So at that age, that can be catastrophic. But he's hanging on. I think he's got great drugs. He also has, you know, in his 12th house, his house of losses and even liberation from physical reality. You know, he's got Mars and Mercury, so that can create like a hypertensive sort of a condition, which speaks to the aneurysms, brain aneurysms. So he's had a lot going on. Rahu is now in his 6th house, which is the house of disease and illness, among other things. Rahu's at 24 degrees. His moon is in his 6th house at 8 degrees. So it's going to be a while before it reaches it. You know, it's going to be a few months. But it's still in the same house. So 6th house is diseases, health, illness, medicines. His 6th house is Aries, so the head. So he has shit going wrong with his head. He has for like 40 years. So he's having this conjunction between Mars, Uranus, Rahu in his head in his 6th house of disease and health. So And again, Uranus is the nervous system, so I don't think this bodes well at all for the guy's nervous system. And then Mercury, the nervous system, is in his 8th house on this day, which is hospitalizations, sudden illnesses, sudden ups and downs. So he's getting put through the ringer. So this is a pretty tough time for him right now. What's the other thing? So he's having a pretty tough time. I think this could be catastrophic for his nervous system, and a big plexus and center for your nervous system is your brain. So in the moon, the moon is the emotional consciousness. It's the mind. Intellect is part of the mind, but the mind is something much bigger. It's the reflector of the soul. It's the matrix that binds your body and soul together. So I think the linkage between his body and soul could, kind of shit the bed in the near future. That is a strong possibility here. So, it's like when people have severe strokes. Sometimes they can't speak, they can't walk, sometimes they're not really conscious. So he could have something happen. I guess he's got the Kung Flu for the second time. I'm not sure if he got the injections or not, but I think those are problematic to the health. So, yeah, he could be incapacitated before long. I don't wish illness or sickness on anybody. I don't wish it on him. But astrology is it's the hand of God written. It's the hand of Uranus written in the heavens. So, yeah. Because again, Uranus is the earth shaker. It turns things over. So he's going to have his head in the 6th house of health turned over. Let's look at Kamala. So, the laughing hyena. Kamala. She, the lobbyist for the Prison Corporation of America. So, I don't think she's a great person, and, my African American friends, a lot of them don't like her because she put hundreds of African Americans in jail for petty marijuana possession when she was a prosecutor in Oakland, California. So, good chance she was getting some kind of kickback from Prison Corporation of America. So, she's got a lot of skeletons, and those skeletons may very well come out in these coming times. So, this conjunction for her, she also has a moon in Aries, like Mr. Biden. Her Aries is her 11th house. So the 11th house is your ability to deliver your message to the world. It's all of your networks. And it's your ability to use technology to reach the world. So it basically has a lot to do with like your public face and your public persona. That is what's going to get, her 11th house is going to get its ass rocked by this. And her moon, her intellectual consciousness. I don't see her having health problems, but I think she's going to be scrambling because if Mr. Biden is incapacitated, she would succeed to the office of the president, but she's going to be scrambling. One of the problems with her, she has Rahu, the North Node, in her 1st house. When you have Rahu in the 1st house, everything you get in life has to come through your own efforts. So she would become president by riding on Joe Biden's coattails because she was his running mate. And, basically, she becomes president because he can't continue on. So, based on that, she would have a disaster presidency. It's like I've been saying. She'd be just like Daenerys Targaryen. She'd be queen for like 10 minutes. And something would happen. She wouldn't stay in the office. I think the deep state handlers that sponsored Biden, they used her. I can't remember the term for it, but it's because she was a woman and because she's part African American, she's part black. But she's also, I mean, she's been in bed with big business for a very long time. But she's a disaster on camera. She's not allowed to speak at great length because, in my opinion, they don't want her going off script because she's got a lot of mean girl energy. She can really piss people off. She has Mars in her second house. It's in Cancer. Mars hates being in Cancer. Mars doesn't want to deal with emotions. It's very uncomfortable with emotions. Second house is your speech. So she has a difficult time handling her emotions, and her speech is combative, and it's hurtful to people. She's a mean girl. So she's got a lot going on. So yeah, I think even if she succeeds to the office of the president, Uranus, Rahu, and Mars is going to wreck her public persona. She's going to be scrambling to try to become popular, to try to consolidate power, to try to get people to listen to her. A lot of the Democratic Party hates her because, again, she threw hundreds of African Americans in jail for petty marijuana possession. So she's not well liked even in her own party. So she's going to be scrambling to be the popular kid, and it's not going to work out well. Now on this day, she has Mercury 2 degrees from her natal Mars. So Mercury's at 29 degrees of Cancer in the second house. Natal Mars is at 27. So the conjunction at the planet at the higher degree in a conjunction rules the conjunction. So basically, Mercury would sit on the throne of Mars. So this would make her communication, Mercury, very combative and hurtful. Mars. So you don't make a lot of friends by hurting people with your words. So if she becomes president, like the radicals who just want to see any woman president, like if Hitler's mistress, Eva Braun, came in as a Democrat and ran, a lot of feminists would vote for her because they want revenge against men. So those types of people will get behind her and they'll celebrate, but it's a fringe element. So just everyday people will be like, this woman's an asshole, like fuck her. Yeah, and those are the big things here. Mercury is like Mercury's the king's messenger. Mars is like the significator of lawyers because lawyers do battle. They do battle in courtrooms and they go to battle on paper. So if she gets the office of president, she'll be like a combative lawyer who's like out to win the case, out to make her case and get people to like her. But people aren't going to like her. So yeah, this is going to be rough for her. And then, and there's probably something relating to computers and software. Like she could have some scandal around computers or emails or something like that because 11th house, where her Aries is, the original ruler is Aquarius. Uranus is a co-ruler of Aquarius. Uranus deals with technology. So, yeah, she could have some big scandal that has computer technology wrapped up in it. So, something will force its way out. Now, the interesting thing about this conjunction between Rahu, Uranus, and Mars, they're at equal degrees. So nobody's ruling the conjunction. So they're all going to be trying to go their own way and have their own agenda. So that's what her presidency would have a lot of that in it. The world's going to have a lot of that in it. And then last thing I'll leave you with, but yeah, so she's going to be in a huge pissing contest. That's not going to be great for building unity and consensus and all these fun progressive buzzwords. the last thing I'll leave you with, I don't have her chart in front of me, but actually it's on my phone. Nancy Pelosi. Nancy Pelosi, if you want to talk about her birth chart, she's a Cancer ascendant. So the Aries is her 10th house. So it's your career house. It's like your reputation. Where is it? I think she's on here. She may not be. All right. Well, you know what? It's too late for that. So she's a Cancer ascendant. She's going to have this explosion of Mars, Uranus, and Rahu in her 10th house of career. 10th house also deals with government. She could have some scandal or I don't know what the hell come about. Might not happen, but I think her career has already been sliding. You know, Congress has like single-digit approval ratings. She's ahead of the House of Reps. And she's a complete snowflake. The press has even been asking her questions about whether her husband is making money with his stock trades off inside information that he's feeding her, and she like flees the podium. So there's not a lot of trust for her. So I think her whole political life could blow up too. And these fucking 80-year-olds in government just need to retire and let some younger people step up. But they're control freaks. And, you know, they think that because their mummies and daddies won World War II, that they're the only ones who know their asses from their elbows. But, you know, they're some of the biggest entitled, clueless brats. So I'm going to leave it at that. But again, this Uranus, Rahu, and Mars hasn't happened for 2,300 years. And last time it happened, it signified innovations in technology, in money. It made money go from solid to liquid. So now money's going to go from liquid to vapor. And we saw these empire builders emerge that thought they were going to rule the world and live forever. Alexander the Great probably thought he was going to get some elixir of immortality. Bill Gates and Eric Schmidt and Jeff Bezos think they're going to get robot bodies to upload their consciousness into. But they're going to fail. So, yeah, New World Order is on its way down. So, I would say don't be in a New World Order epicenter if you're worried. So if you're in Chicago, D.C., New York, Boston, San Francisco, L.A., you might want to rethink that. So anyway, have a good one. And, and the other thing too, I don't see this as a good time for Europe either. Because I think the EU is going to break up, and Russia's cutting off the gas supply, and so yeah, at least not in the big European cities anyway. So anyway, thanks for tuning in, and have a nice one.